The first time you set a boundary, it can feel less like strength and more like grief. You say one simple sentence, maybe even a quiet one. You say no. You say not this time. You say I need space. You say I can't keep doing this. And then something strange happens. The room changes. The air changes. The person in front of you changes. Sometimes they go cold. Sometimes they get angry. Sometimes they act confused, wounded, betrayed, as if your small act of self-respect has somehow become an attack on them. And if you are the kind of person who has spent years being warm, available, forgiving, easy to reach, easy to lean on, easy to take from, that moment can shake you more than you expected. Because the boundary itself is not always what hurts. What hurts is the revelation. You begin to see who was comfortable with your warmth only as long as it had no edge. You begin to notice who loved your softness because it asked nothing of them. You begin to understand that some people did not come close to your heart. They came close to your availability. There is a difference, and once you feel it, you cannot unfeel it. Maybe you remember the exact moment, the unread message, the pause after your no, the silence after you stopped explaining yourself, the sudden distance that appeared when you no longer rushed to smooth everything over. It can feel like punishment, but often it is exposure. The boundary does not create the truth, it reveals the truth. And that is why it can sting so deeply. Because warmth is beautiful, but warmth without boundaries becomes a resource other people learn to consume. They do not always do this consciously. That is the part many people miss. Not every person who uses your warmth wakes up and thinks, I will take from this person today. Sometimes the pattern is more unconscious than that. Sometimes they simply learn that your giving will continue, your patience will continue, your forgiveness will continue, your emotional labor will continue, your understanding will continue even when theirs does not. So they stop meeting you as a person and start meeting you as a function, and that is where the wound begins. Carl Jung would have understood something important here. When a pattern repeats, it is rarely only about the other person. It is also about the inner role you have been carrying, the persona, the shadow, the complex that gets activated when you feel needed, responsible, useful, chosen for your endurance rather than your truth. Maybe your persona has been the good one, the one who stays calm, the one who keeps the peace, the one who gives the benefit of the doubt, the one who can handle more than most people, the one who is so understanding. Those words can sound like compliments, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they are also the shape of a cage. Because if your identity becomes built around being the one who never causes trouble, then your own discomfort starts to feel like disloyalty. You ignore the tightness in your chest because you do not want to be difficult. You override the knot in your stomach because you do not want to seem unkind. You keep the door open because you fear that closing it will make you the bad one. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to betray yourself in the name of being good. That is how the boundary becomes terrifying, not because it is cruel, but because it threatens the role that kept you emotionally safe. If you have been the warm one for too long, then being firm can feel like becoming someone you do not recognize. You may even feel guilty before anything has actually gone wrong. That guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is the nervous system reacting to a new identity. The old identity says, keep giving, keep smoothing, keep absorbing, keep understanding. The new one says, I am allowed to stop. And when you first hear that sentence inside yourself, it can sound almost offensive. Stop? Just stop? Yes. Sometimes the healing begins there, but this is only the surface. The deeper truth is more uncomfortable, because when someone reacts badly to your boundary, they are not only reacting to the boundary itself, they are reacting to the loss of access, to the loss of a dynamic, to the loss of a version of you that made their life easier. And if you have been used to being the emotional container for other people's chaos, their discomfort may feel like proof that you are selfish. But pause there. Ask yourself a harder question. If your kindness only counts when it costs you something, was it kindness or was it self-erasure? That is a painful question, because many deeply caring people have never learned the difference. They were praised for being easy. They were rewarded for not needing much. They were loved for being useful. And then, when they finally set a boundary, the room felt colder because the room had been warmed by their self-abandonment. That is the paradox. The very thing that made you easy to use was the thing you mistook for love. Not always. Not in every relationship. Not with every person. But in enough moments to matter. You may have thought you were being cherished because you were generous. In reality, you may have been cherished because you were manageable. That is a devastating realization, and it can make you question every memory. You start replaying old conversations. You start looking for signs you ignored. You start wondering whether your warmth was ever appreciated at all. The mind wants a clean answer, but human relationships are rarely clean. Some people did care. Some people did not know how to care well. Some people loved what you did for them more than they knew how to love who you were. And some people simply took what was offered and never stopped to ask what it was costing you. This is where projection becomes important. In Jungian psychology, projection is what happens when we place an inner image onto another person and then relate to that image as if it were reality. Sometimes we project our longing. Sometimes we project our healing. Sometimes we project our hope that this person will finally be the one who sees us, protects us, chooses us, values us without conditions. And when someone is emotionally hungry, they can project almost anything onto the person who seems warm enough to hold it. You may have projected goodness onto them because you wanted the relationship to mean more than it did. They may have projected availability onto you because they wanted the comfort without the responsibility. Neither projection is rare, both are human. But when two projections meet, the relationship can become a dream that only one person is trying to wake up from. You keep trying to make it real. They keep trying to keep it useful. That is why the boundary is so revealing. Because a boundary interrupts the projection. It introduces reality. It says, here is where I end. Here is what I will not carry. Here is what I will no longer explain away. And the moment reality enters, the mask slips. Maybe not dramatically. Maybe not with shouting or tears. Sometimes the mask falls in something smaller. A delayed reply. A colder tone. A sudden distance. A strange irritation at your calmness. A subtle punishment for your clarity. The person who benefited from your softness may not know how to meet your firmness without feeling exposed. Because your boundary does not only protect you, it also removes the mirror they were using to avoid themselves. That is why people can become so uncomfortable around boundaries they did not expect. You were not just being kind. You were making it possible for them not to look at their own behavior. And once you stop doing that, the whole emotional arrangement changes. There is a hidden grief in this, especially for empaths, for deeply caring people, for those who learned early that love meant reading the room, calming the tension, anticipating what everyone else needed before it was spoken. If that was your survival strategy, then warmth was never just personality. It was adaptation. It was intelligence. It was how you stayed connected. It was how you reduced conflict. It was how you earned safety. So when you begin to set boundaries, it does not only challenge the other person, it challenges the part of you that believes connection must be purchased through emotional labor. That part of you may panic. It may whisper, if you stop giving, they will leave. If you stop fixing, they will be disappointed. If you stop explaining, they will think you are cold. If you stop forgiving so quickly, they will stop loving you. This is where the complex lives. Not in the event itself, but in the ancient fear underneath it. The abandonment complex does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like over-explaining. Sometimes it looks like apologizing for having needs. Sometimes it looks like staying too long in conversations that have already gone dead. Sometimes it looks like calling your own exhaustion, being patient. And then one day you draw a line, and that old fear rises like a wave. The body reacts before the mind can catch up. Your stomach tightens. Your chest feels heavy. You want to soften the line, take it back, make it easier for them to swallow. But if you do that too quickly, you teach your nervous system that your boundary is only valid when it is convenient for other people. That is how many people lose themselves. Not in one betrayal, but in thousands of tiny retreats. One more exception, one more explanation, one more chance, one more time pretending that your discomfort is temporary and their pattern is the real issue. But eventually, the body begins to speak louder than the story. You feel tired in a way that sleep does not fix. You feel drained after certain conversations. You feel strangely invisible when you are most generous. You feel resentment where you used to feel only compassion. And resentment, when it is honest, is often a boundary that arrived too late. That does not make you bad. It makes you human. It means something in you has been asking for protection for a long time, and now the protection is finally here. The first boundary is often awkward because you are not only teaching someone else how to treat you, you are teaching yourself that you are allowed to take up space without apology. This is where the shadow enters. The shadow is not just the dark side of personality. It is everything you had to push down in order to remain acceptable. Anger, needs, refusal, self-interest, the right to say no without a speech, the right to disappoint someone, the right to let someone feel their own feelings without rescuing them from every uncomfortable emotion. If you have been the warm one for years, your shadow may contain all the parts of you that are tired of being warm on command. Not cruel, not abusive, just real. A person with a healthy boundary is not a person without compassion. It is a person whose compassion no longer includes self-betrayal. That distinction matters, because the world often teaches caring people to confuse guilt with morality. If you feel guilty, you must be wrong. If someone is upset, you must have failed. If a relationship becomes tense after you speak up, you must have been too harsh. But the psyche is more complicated than that. Sometimes guilt is simply the sound of an old structure collapsing. Sometimes discomfort is the price of honesty. Sometimes the first sign that you have stopped being used is that you no longer feel easy to use. And yes, that can feel lonely. Because once you stop offering unlimited access, some people disappear. Not always forever, not always maliciously, but the dynamic changes. The easy flow is interrupted, the emotional shortcut is gone, and suddenly you can see who was there for your presence and who was there for your utility. This is painful, but it is also clarifying. It is better to grieve a truth than to worship an illusion. It is better to feel the ache of being seen accurately than the comfort of being used softly. There is a moment in many people's lives when they realize they were not loved most when they were most themselves. They were loved most when they were most accommodating. They were valued when they made things smoother. They were praised when they asked for less. They were kept close when they made no demands. That realization can collapse an entire inner world, because if you built your self-worth around being the person others could rely on, then discovering that reliability was also your vulnerability can feel like betrayal. Not just betrayal by others, betrayal by the role you trusted to keep you safe. But roles are not selves. A persona can help us survive, but it cannot feed the soul forever. At some point, the self asks for something deeper than usefulness. It asks for truth. And truth often sounds like this: I am done paying for connection with my peace. I am done confusing endurance with love. I am done treating my boundaries like a luxury. I am done being grateful for crumbs that arrived because I was too exhausted to ask for a meal. That is not bitterness, that is clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you stop asking the wrong question. You stop asking, why can't they value me? You begin asking, why did I keep handing my value to people who only recognized my usefulness? That question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. For some people, the answer lies in childhood. For others, in repeated relational wounds. For others, in a family system where love was conditional, where peace depended on being good, where tension had to be managed by the most sensitive person in the room. The exact origin matters less than the recognition that your overgiving did not come from nowhere. It was learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. But unlearning is rarely graceful. It feels like awkward pauses. It feels like silence where you used to rush in. It feels like leaving a message unread until you can answer from calm instead of fear. It feels like not volunteering to fix what someone else broke. It feels like letting an uncomfortable conversation stay uncomfortable long enough for reality to enter the room. And yes, in the beginning, that can make you feel cold. But coldness is not always cruelty. Sometimes, coldness is the nervous system finally stepping back from the fire. Sometimes, distance is not punishment, it is oxygen. Sometimes silence is not a game. It is the sound of your body no longer volunteering for harm. That is why the boundary can reveal so much. It reveals not just who was taking, but what in you was willing to be taken from. It reveals the places where your warmth was mixed with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being ordinary if you are not needed, fear of becoming invisible if you are no longer useful. Those fears are deep, and they deserve compassion. But compassion does not mean obeying them. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, Write a single sentence for yourself in the comments or in your notes tonight. Not a performance, not a speech. Just one honest sentence about where you have been abandoning yourself in the name of keeping the peace. Because naming the pattern is often the first real boundary. And once you name it, you can begin to feel where it lives in the body. Maybe in the throat, when you want to speak but swallow it. Maybe in the shoulders, when you carry what is not yours. Maybe in the stomach, when you say yes but mean no. Maybe in the heart, when you keep hoping someone will notice your pain without you having to become impossible to ignore. That hope is tender, but it can also keep you trapped. You do not need to become hard to become safe. You do not need to become suspicious to become wise. You do not need to punish anyone to stop participating in your own depletion. What you need is a return to inner authority. And inner authority is quiet. It does not shout to prove itself. It does not explain itself to exhaustion. It does not beg to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding it. It simply says, "This is where I stop. This is what I will not carry. This is what I will no longer call love." And the strange thing is, the more you practice that kind of truth, the less power the old pattern has over you. Not because everyone suddenly changes, not because every taker becomes enlightened, not because every manipulative dynamic dissolves into peace, but because your psyche no longer has to keep pretending that being used is the same as being loved. That is a huge release, a painful one at first, but a release. The face of the person in front of you may stay the same. The messages may come or not come. The apologies may sound sincere or empty. The silence may continue. But something deeper has shifted. You are no longer standing in the doorway of your own life, hoping that someone else will finally notice the cost of your generosity. You notice it. That is the beginning of dignity. And dignity is not dramatic. It is not a speech. It is not revenge. It is not proving that you were right. It is the quiet decision not to hand your tenderness to people who only know how to consume it. The old part of you may still want to rescue the situation. It may still want to smooth the edges. It may still want to send one more message, one more explanation, one more softening phrase to make sure nobody feels too bad. But pause there and ask, who have you been protecting in that moment? Their comfort or your own truth? Because sometimes the real boundary is not the one you say out loud. Sometimes the real boundary is the one you keep when no one is watching. The one where you do not reopen the wound just because silence makes you anxious. The one where you allow the other person to feel the weight of their own behavior without rushing in to carry it for them. That is not cruelty. That is maturity. And maturity can feel lonely at first because it asks you to let go of the fantasy that being endlessly available makes you safe. It does not. It makes you legible to users. It makes you easy to bypass. It makes your heart readable as a resource instead of a home. But the moment you stop offering your warmth without discernment, your life begins to reorganize itself around truth. Some relationships deepen, some fade. Some reveal they were never relationships in the first place, only arrangements built on your willingness to absorb what others could not hold. That realization can be heartbreaking, and still, it is a mercy. Because once you see it, you can stop calling exhaustion love. You can stop calling anxiety chemistry. You can stop calling self-sacrifice devotion. You can begin to choose differently, slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And yes, there will be moments when old guilt returns. It may arrive the first time you say no without over-explaining. It may arrive the first time you let a message sit unanswered. It may arrive when someone reacts badly to your calm. Do not panic when that happens. Guilt does not always mean you crossed a moral line. Sometimes it means you crossed an internal threshold. You are no longer the same person who could be quietly drained without noticing. That person is waking up, and waking up is rarely tidy. It comes with grief for the years you spent being too available to notice your own thirst. It comes with anger for the times your softness was treated like a public service. It comes with sadness for the versions of you that stayed too long because they did not yet know they were allowed to leave. Let that grief be real, but do not make it a reason to return to the old arrangement. The old arrangement was not peace, it was postponement. Postponement of truth, postponement of self-respect, postponement of the moment when you finally say, I am not here to be consumed, I am here to live, And living requires boundaries, not walls, not punishment, not emotional games, just clean edges around your heart. A place where your warmth can exist without becoming a sacrifice. A place where your yes means yes because your no is also real. A place where your care is given freely, not extracted through guilt. A place where your presence is a gift, not an entitlement. This is what the boundary reveals. It reveals who can meet you as a person, and who could only ever meet you as a source. It reveals which relationships are built on mutuality, and which ones were built on your reluctance to disappoint. It reveals where you were still hoping to be chosen for your soul, when someone was only responding to your service. And once you see that, you cannot unknow it. The mirror has changed. The room has changed. You have changed. Not into someone colder, but into someone clearer. Not into someone harder, but into someone harder to misuse. Not into someone who loves less, but into someone who loves without disappearing. That is the real transformation. And if there is one thing Carl Jung helps us understand here, it is that individuation is not becoming perfect. It is becoming whole enough to stop living as a split between what you feel and what you allow. It is the slow return of the self to the center of your life, not the role, not the mask, not the old agreement that your worth depends on how little trouble you cause. The self does not ask you to become unkind. It asks you to become true. And truth, once embodied, changes the quality of every room you enter. The phone can stay silent. The message can remain unread. The door can stay half open or close. And still, you will not be standing there waiting in the same way. Because the most important boundary was never between you and them. It was between you and the part of you that kept volunteering to be less than you are. My kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. Say that to yourself slowly, not as a slogan, as a return. Because when your warmth finally has a boundary, it stops being a resource for the wrong people and becomes a home for your own soul. And that is when you begin to recognize the difference between being wanted and being used. The difference between being needed and being valued. The difference between being available and being loved. The difference between a mask that smiles for everyone and a face that finally belongs to itself. When you understand that difference, the silence no longer feels like empty space. It becomes space. Space for dignity. Space for clarity. Space for the kind of life that does not require you to disappear in order to be accepted. And if someone truly belongs in that life, they will not only notice your warmth, they will respect the line that protects it. If they do not, then the boundary has already told you what you needed to know. And you do not have to chase the answer any further. You can simply come back to yourself.